Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is November 26th. On this day in 1993, in a quiet neighborhood in Sunderland, England, the body of 18-year-old Thomas Kelly was found in a burning shed. At first, it looked like a tragic accident, but as the months went on, it became clear that what happened that night was the start of something far more sinister, a series of murders that would shake the city. By early 1994, two more teenagers were dead in almost identical circumstances. And by 1996, a man named Stephen Grieveson had been convicted of killing 3 boys. His motive, according to prosecutors, he was trying to hide his sexuality. Today, we're talking about a case that started off a series of killings in Sunderland, England, the murder of Thomas Kelly. Let's get started. It was just after dark on Friday, November 26, 1993, when fire crews were called to allotments off Newcastle Road in Fulwell. A shed was burning. Once the flames were under control, firefighters made a grim discovery: the body of 18-year-old Thomas Kelly. At first, no one was really sure what had happened, and investigators were cautious. After all, it could have been an accident or maybe something reckless that had gone horribly wrong. And for a while, that's how the case was classified, as an accidental death, not a homicide. But winter wasn't done with Sunderland yet, and neither was whomever had taken Thomas's life. On February 4th, 1994, a second teen, 15-year-old David Hansen, was found dead after a fire in a rundown building on Roker Terrace. Then, just 3 weeks later, on February 25th, another 15-year-old, David Grief, was discovered in a burned allotment shed, just steps away from where Thomas had died. The similarities by that point were impossible to ignore. The victims were all local boys, all young, and they were all found in fire-damaged scenes. Investigators, though, were still cautious, and they stopped short of calling the deaths murders. But they admitted what the public already suspected: something very wrong was happening. It wasn't until after the third death that the case truly shifted. Local pathologists hadn't initially found conclusive signs of homicide. But once outside experts were brought in, everything changed. According to these new experts, all 3 boys had been strangled, with a very specific detail. Each had a ligature tied in a half-hitch knot behind the left side of the neck. It was a signature. The fires, it turned out, weren't the cause of death. They were a cover-up. In Thomas Kelly's case, prosecutors later said that he was strangled with his own scarf before the fire was set. It was the same method that was then repeated in the other murders. By March 1994, investigators were looking at a local man in his early 20s, Steve Grieveson. Police initially arrested him on an attempted burglary at the Roker Terrace address where David Hansen had been found. But they quickly determined that this wasn't just some sort of coincidence. Grieveson's fingerprint was found on a basement window at the scene. His shoe print matched one left on broken boards nearby. And the most damning link came from the third victim. DNA recovered from David Grief's body matched Grieveson. By late 1995, Stephen Grieveson was formally charged with all 3 murders. The trial began in early 1996. Prosecutors laid out their case: 3 teenage boys, 3 suspicious fires, and 1 man with a growing list of evidence pointing directly at him. They argued that Grieveson targeted boys he knew or had approached, then strangled them, and used the fire to destroy evidence. His motive, according to the prosecution, was to hide his homosexuality in a time and place where he feared exposure. The forensic evidence, especially the repeated nodding pattern, was central. On February 29, 1996, the jury found Stephen Grieveson guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 3 life terms with a minimum sentence of 35 years. Those verdicts brought long-awaited clarity to what happened on that cold night in 1993 when Thomas Kelly lost his life. Though it had been long suspected, now there was definitive proof that Thomas hadn't died in a tragic accident. He'd been murdered, and his killer had struck again. For Thomas's family, it meant finally having the truth acknowledged in a court of law. His death wasn't a mystery anymore. It was part of a horrific pattern, and justice, at least in part, had finally been served. After the verdict, Thomas's father told reporters, quote, "It is a great relief this monster is off the streets so no other family will have to go through what we faced," end quote. But as it would turn out, Grieveson's conviction wouldn't be the end of the story. Years later, in 2013, the story took another dark turn. Stephen Grieveson was brought back to court, this time for the 1990 killing of 14-year-old Simon Martin, 3 years before the series of murders that began with the death of Thomas Kelly. In court, Grieveson admitted to causing Simon's death, but claimed that it wasn't premeditated. The jury didn't believe him. He was convicted and handed a 4th life sentence. The murder of Thomas Kelly kicked off a trail of fear and confusion that blanketed Sunderland during the winter of 1993 and 1994. The city experienced 3 murders in 3 months and 2 allotment fires within yards of each other. What turned the tide in these cases was forensic science. The ligature marks, the DNA, and the pattern that emerged only after tragedy repeated itself. That attention to detail helped bring a serial killer to justice and eventually solved a cold case. And for Thomas Kelly, the boy whose murder started it all, the truth is now part of public record. He didn't die in an accident. He was murdered, and his killer will likely never walk free. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found Thomas's story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!